The morning sun barely broke through the heavy clouds as a woman in her 30s hurried up the courthouse steps. Her worn black shoes clicked against the marble, each step bringing her closer to a moment that would change her life forever. She paused at the massive wooden doors, taking a deep breath to steady herself. The woman smoothed down her simple blue blouse and adjusted her gray skirt, clothes she had ironed 3 times that morning, wanting to look her best. In her arms, she clutched a folder stuffed with papers, rental agreements, photos of broken pipes, emails to her landlord that had gone unanswered for months. For someone who had never set foot in a courtroom before, the weight of these documents felt like her only shield against what waited inside. The hallway stretched before her like a Grand Canyon, its high ceilings and polished floors making her feel smaller with each step. Well-dressed lawyers brushed past, their confident voices echoing as they greeted each other with easy familiarity. The woman clutched her folder tighter, feeling the outsider in a world with its own language and unwritten rules. "Courtroom 6, she whispered to herself, checking the crumpled paper in her hand for the 10th time that morning. Finding the right door, she slipped inside and sat in the back row, watching carefully as others presented their cases. The judge, a man with silver hair and cold eyes, sat elevated above everyone else. His voice boomed through the room as he questioned lawyers and made quick decisions that affected people's lives. When her case number was called, her legs trembled as she walked to the front. Standing behind the wooden table felt like being on stage without knowing her lines. The landlord's lawyer stood opposite, a man in an expensive suit who didn't even glance her way. "And you are representing yourself?" the judge asked, looking down at her over his glasses. "Yes, Your Honor," she replied, her voice smaller than she'd intended. She pulled out her carefully organized papers, the corners now damp from her nervous hands. As she began explaining about the water damage in her kitchen and the mold that had made her little boy sick, the judge cut her off. "Ma'am, I need you to cite the relevant housing code violations. This court operates on law, not stories." She fumbled through her papers, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I'm sorry, I don't know the exact codes, but I have pictures of—" "If you come to this court, you need to come prepared," the judge interrupted, his voice sharp with impatience. A few snickers rippled through the audience behind her. The landlord's lawyer stood smoothly. "Your Honor, my client has responded to all maintenance requests within the legally required timeframe. I have documentation here." The woman tried again. "But that's not true. I have copies of emails from 3 months ago that—" "You'll speak when addressed," the judge snapped. "Legal procedure exists for a reason." For 15 painful minutes, she stood as her case fell apart around her. The landlord's lawyer used words she didn't understand, cited laws she'd never heard of, and presented paperwork that contradicted her claims. When she tried to explain the real situation, the judge either cut her off or asked questions using terms she couldn't follow. "Perhaps next time you'll consider proper legal representation," the judge said, his tone dripping with condescension. "This court isn't a place for amateurs to waste our time." The final blow came with his ruling. Not only did she lose her case, but she was ordered to pay the landlord's legal fees. Tears burned behind her eyes as the judge explained she had 7 days to leave her home. As she gathered her useless papers with shaking hands, she heard the whispers around her. The clerk behind the desk shook her head with something like pity. 2 lawyers near the door exchanged glances and smirks. She walked out with her head down, shame weighing on her shoulders, but something else stirred deep inside her chest. A tiny, hard kernel of determination taking root. Someday, she promised herself as the heavy courthouse door swung shut behind her, things would be very different. The small apartment felt even smaller now, with boxes stacked against the walls and the sound of children trying to be quiet. The woman sat at the kitchen table, a cup of cold tea forgotten beside her as she stared at the eviction notice one last time. "Mom." Her 12-year-old daughter stood in the doorway, already dressed for school though the sun had barely risen. "Aren't you okay?" She forced a smile, just thinking. She'd folded the paper and tucked it into her pocket. "Is your brother ready?" The girl nodded, her eyes too serious for a child. Since that terrible day in court 3 weeks ago, both children had grown quieter, as if trying to take up less space in the world. They had until the end of the week to leave their home of 5 years. 5 years of birthday parties in the small backyard. 5 years of height marks penciled on the kitchen doorframe. 5 years of memories they would leave behind. Her sister had offered them her spare room and pull-out couch. It was across town, meaning new schools for the kids, longer bus rides to work for her. But they had nowhere else to go. That afternoon, she left work early to meet with the school principal about transferring the children. Walking through the parking lot, she passed a shiny car with a familiar face behind the wheel, the landlord's lawyer who had made her look like a fool in court. He didn't even glance her way as he spoke importantly into his phone. She ducked her head and hurried past, the shame of that day washing over her again. That night, after the children were asleep, her son curled on the couch, her daughter sharing her bed. She couldn't rest. The judge's words echoed in her mind. This court isn't a place for amateurs. The mocking tone, the snickers from the audience, the feeling of being small and stupid and powerless. She slipped out of bed and went to the kitchen table. From her work bag, she pulled out a library book, Understanding Housing Law for Non-Lawyers. She had checked it out on impulse during her lunch break. The words swam before her tired eyes, legal terms she didn't understand, references to cases she'd never heard of. But she kept reading. When a word confused her, she wrote it down to look up later. When a concept seemed important, she underlined it with her fingertip, careful not to mark the library book. The next evening she did the same, and the next, sometimes reading only a page before exhaustion claimed her. Moving day came in a rush of borrowed pickup trucks and friends with strong arms. Her children watched silently as strangers carried their lives in boxes. Her daughter clutched a stuffed bear she'd had since she was 3. Her son asked if they could take the doorframe with their height marks. They couldn't. Her sister's apartment was clean but cramped. The pull-out couch creaked whenever someone moved. The children shared the spare room, their belongings stacked in corners. They would make it work. They had to. 2 days after moving, she enrolled in a free community program, Legal Rights for Renters. She sat in the back row, notebook open, pen ready. Most attendees were there because their landlords had sent them, part of settling disputes without going to court. She was the only one who took notes. The workshop leader, a retired legal aid lawyer with kind eyes, noticed her intensity. After the 3rd weekly session, he approached her. "You ask good questions," he said. "Have you considered learning more about the law?" She almost laughed. "I barely finished high school, and I have 2 kids, and 2 jobs now." "That's not what I asked," he said gently. "The local community college has night classes, some with scholarships." That night, lying on the pull-out couch, listening to her sister's soft snores from the bedroom and the occasional car passing outside, she allowed herself to imagine a different future, not just getting by, not just finding another apartment that might have another bad landlord, but learning the rules of a game that had been rigged against her. She thought of her children watching her fail in that courtroom. Then she imagined them watching her succeed somewhere else. The next morning, she looked up the community college website on the public library computer. The community college application form sat on the kitchen table, half filled out and intimidating. The woman chewed on her pen, staring at the question that had stopped her cold. "Please explain why you wish to enter the paralegal program." How could she put into words what drove her? The humiliation in that courtroom. The look in her children's eyes when they had to leave their home. The burning need to never feel so powerless again. Her son peeked over her shoulder. "What are you writing, Mom?" She smiled and ruffled his hair. "Just trying to explain why I want to learn about laws and stuff." "Because of what happened with our old house?" he asked, his voice small. She nodded. "Partly. And because I want to make things better." "You should just write that," he said with the simple wisdom of a 9-year-old. After tucking the children into bed that night, she returned to the form. In simple words, she wrote her truth. About standing in a courtroom feeling invisible. About wanting to help others like her. About believing that justice shouldn't depend on how much money you had or what fancy words you knew. When she sealed the envelope, her hands trembled slightly. Mailing it felt like throwing a message in a bottle into a vast ocean, a desperate hope that someone might read it and understand. 2 weeks passed. She worked double shifts at the diner, came home with aching feet, helped the children with homework, and fell into exhausted sleep. The application faded from her mind, replaced by immediate concerns. Her daughter needed new shoes, winter was coming, and the heating in her sister's apartment was unreliable. Then the letter arrived. She opened it while standing at the mailbox, too impatient to wait. The first word she saw was congratulations. That night, they celebrated with a cake her daughter helped bake. Her sister raised a glass of juice and a toast. To new beginnings, she said. But reality quickly dampened the celebration. Classes would mean 3 nights a week away from her children. Textbooks cost more than she had budgeted for. And the program would take 2 years. 2 years of stretched time and money. Maybe I should wait, she told her sister, looking at the course catalog with its intimidating descriptions. Until the kids are older. Until we have our own place again. Her sister shook her head. There will always be reasons to wait, but you've got fire in your eyes when you talk about this. I haven't seen that in a long time. The first night of class arrived with a stomach full of butterflies. She wore her best outfit, clean but nothing fancy. Around her sat younger students straight from high school, middle-aged people seeking career changes, and a few older folks with gray hair and determined expressions. The classroom smelled of chalk and possibility. The instructor, a practicing paralegal with 20 years of experience, looked directly at her when explaining how the law affected everyday people. Most folks don't need a lawyer until something has already gone wrong, she said. By then, they're already disadvantaged. That's where we come in, to level the playing field. Those words lit something inside her. That night, she stayed up late reading the first chapter of her textbook, dictionary at her side for the words she didn't understand. The weeks that followed tested her in ways she hadn't imagined. Numbers swam before her eyes as she calculated how many hours she needed to work to pay for childcare during her classes. Her sister helped when she could, but had her own job and life. Some nights, she studied at the diner during her break, textbook propped against the napkin holder. Other nights, she fell asleep with her cheek pressed against a page about legal procedures, waking with ink marks on her face. Her children watched her with curious eyes. Her daughter asked questions about what she was learning. Her son drew her pictures of people in judges' robes, always with smiles on their faces. 6 weeks into the program, her first test came back with an A-. She stared at the grade in disbelief, then tucked it into her wallet where she could see it whenever doubt crept in. That weekend, she took her children to the public library. While they browsed the children's section, she found herself standing in front of shelves marked Law. Books that once seemed as impenetrable as a foreign language now looked like tools she was slowly learning to use. She checked out a slim volume, Understanding Court Procedures for Non-Lawyers. As the librarian stamped the due date, the woman thought about how far she still had to go. But for the first time since that terrible day in court, the path ahead seemed possible. 1 year into her paralegal studies, the woman barely recognized her life. Her small desk in the corner of her sister's living room overflowed with textbooks and sticky notes. Her children had grown used to seeing her with highlighters tucked behind her ear and legal pads filled with her neat handwriting. "Mom, can you help me with my homework?" her daughter asked one evening, math book in hand. The woman looked up from her own studies, eyes tired but determined. "Give me 5 minutes to finish this section on property law." Her daughter settled beside her, watching her mother work. "Is it hard?" she asked. "Yes," the woman answered honestly. "But that doesn't mean I can't do it." Those words had become her mantra. When classes grew difficult, when work exhausted her, when money ran short, she reminded herself that hard didn't mean impossible. Her classmates had noticed her determination. A study group formed around her kitchen table twice a week. They brought coffee and shared notes, connecting over the challenges they all faced. The woman was often the one explaining complex concepts to others, finding simple ways to make sense of confusing legal language. "You have a gift," one classmate told her. "You make the law sound like normal people talk." She laughed. "Maybe because I remember what it's like to not understand a word of it." Her paralegal instructor had taken notice too. After class one night, she approached the woman with a job posting. "The public defender's office needs a part-time assistant. The pay isn't great, but the experience would be valuable." The woman hesitated. "I'm still learning. I don't know if I'm ready." "Nobody ever feels ready," her instructor said. "But I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't think you could handle it." The interview terrified her. She wore her only professional outfit, black pants, and a blue blouse she'd found at a thrift store. The public defender's office smelled of old paper and coffee. The supervising attorney, a woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense manner, asked straightforward questions about her studies and why she wanted the position. 3 years ago, I stood in court and lost my home because I didn't understand the system, she answered honestly. I never want anyone else to feel that helpless if I can help it. She started the following Monday, working 20 hours a week filing paperwork, answering phones, and observing the attorneys. She took notes constantly, asking questions during lunch breaks. Most clients who came through the doors reminded her of herself, ordinary people caught in legal situations they didn't understand. One afternoon, a young mother came in, eviction notice in hand, 2 small children clinging to her legs. The woman felt as if she were looking at herself from years ago. I can help you with the intake forms, she offered gently, noticing how the mother's hands shook. As she explained the process, translating legal terms into plain language, she watched relief slowly replace fear on the mother's face. Thank you for not making me feel stupid, the mother whispered as they finished the paperwork. That night, the woman couldn't sleep. Something had shifted inside her. Helping complete strangers navigate the system that had once crushed her felt right in a way nothing else had. When her children were asleep, she opened her laptop and searched for law school admission requirements. The list seemed impossible. 4-year degree required, LSAT exam, recommendation letters, substantial tuition costs. She had only her paralegal certificate in progress and barely enough money for next month's bills. She closed the laptop and stared at the ceiling. The practical side of her brain said to be content with becoming a paralegal. That was already more than she dreamed possible on that humiliating day in court. But another voice, growing louder each day, whispered that she could go further. The next morning, she stopped by the community college advisor's office. I want to know what it would take for someone like me to eventually go to law school, she said, the words feeling both frightening and right. The advisor, an older man with reading glasses perched on his nose, didn't laugh or dismiss her. Instead, he pulled out several brushes. It's a long road, he warned. But I've seen longer journeys completed one step at a time. She left with a new plan, finish her paralegal certificate, then enroll in night classes for a bachelor's degree. It would take years. Her children would be teenagers by the time she finished. But as she walked to the bus stop, something the advisor said echoed in her mind. The years will pass anyway. The question is where you want to be when they're done. She knew her answer. She wanted to be wearing the robe, not standing helpless before it. 40 years passed like turning pages in a book, sometimes slowly, sometimes in a rush, but always moving forward. The woman now had her paralegal certificate and was halfway through her bachelor's degree in legal studies. Her children were teenagers, her daughter 15 and her son 12, both growing tall and independent. They had their own apartment now, small but clean, with 2 bedrooms and a tiny kitchen where homework and legal textbooks often shared the same table. Pictures drawn by her children years ago hung in frames on the walls. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, paid for by her full-time job at a local law firm. You're our secret weapon, her boss often told her. He was a kind older attorney who had taken a chance on hiring her right after she finished her paralegal program. You speak both languages, lawyer talk and regular people talk. The woman smiled at the compliment but knew the truth was simpler. She remembered what it felt like to be on the other side of the desk, confused and afraid. Each morning, she woke at 5 to study before her children got up for school. Each night, she attended classes after putting dinner on the table. The routine was exhausting but had become as natural as breathing. Her daughter had started talking about college herself, researching scholarships and programs. I'm going to be a doctor, she announced one evening as they washed dishes together. I want to help people like you do. The woman felt tears prick her eyes. Her children had watched her struggle for years, but they had also watched her grow. At the law firm, she specialized in housing cases. Her boss had noticed her passion for helping tenants understand their rights. You have a way of explaining complicated issues that makes sense to people, he told her. That's rare in our profession. One Tuesday afternoon, a case came across her desk that made her hands shake. A family facing eviction from the same apartment complex where she had once lived. The same property management company. The same issues with repairs never made and complaints ignored. She recognized the pattern immediately. The management company would delay repairs, then blame tenants for damages. When tenants withheld rent in protest, eviction notices followed. "I want to help with this case," she told her boss, explaining her personal connection. He listened carefully, then nodded. "You've earned it. But remember, this is about the law, not revenge." She spent weeks gathering evidence, interviewing tenants, photographing violations, and researching precedents. Her past experience as a tenant combined powerfully with her legal training. She knew exactly which questions to ask, which details mattered most. When the day of the hearing arrived, she sat beside her boss at the table, organized files before them. Her heart pounded as she remembered sitting alone on the other side years ago. The courtroom looked smaller now, less intimidating. She understood its rhythms and rules. She knew the legal language that had once sounded like gibberish. The judge who entered wasn't the one who had humiliated her years ago, but a woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for fairness. As the proceedings began, the woman's boss leaned over and whispered, "You take lead on this one. You know it better than I do." Her head snapped up in surprise. Paralegals didn't usually present cases, but her boss nodded encouragingly. She stood, her voice steady as she addressed the court. "Your Honor, this case represents a pattern of behavior by the property management company that violates multiple housing codes." As she spoke, she felt something inside her click into place. The law wasn't a weapon to be used against the vulnerable. It was a shield that anyone could learn to wield. The judge listened attentively, asking pointed questions that the woman answered with confidence. When the property manager's expensive attorney tried to overwhelm her with legal jargon, she calmly translated his arguments into plain English before dismantling them. "The law is clear on this matter," she concluded. "These families deserve protection." When the judge ruled in favor of the tenants, ordering repairs and blocking the evictions, the woman felt a wave of emotion she hadn't expected. Not triumph over an enemy, but satisfaction in seeing the system work as it should. Later that evening, as she shared the news with her children over dinner, her son asked, "Mom, are you going to be a lawyer someday?" She looked at her children's hopeful faces, at the LSAT prep books stacked by her bed, at the law school brochures on her desk. "Yes," she said. "I think I am." That night, she applied for the LSAT exam. The application fee cost nearly a week's groceries, but she submitted it without hesitation. Some investments were worth every penny. 7 years had passed since that humiliating day in court. 7 years of late nights, early mornings, instant noodles, and coffee. 7 years of textbooks, exams, and gradually paying off student loans. The journey that began with a paralegal certificate had led to a bachelor's degree, then somehow, through stubborn determination and countless sacrifices, to law school. Today, she stood before the mirror in her modest apartment bedroom, adjusting a borrowed suit jacket. Her hair, now with a few strands of gray at the temples, was pulled back neatly. Her hands, which had once trembled while holding eviction papers, now moved with calm purpose as she fastened a simple necklace, a gift from her children when she passed the bar exam. "You look like a real lawyer," her daughter said from the doorway, pride evident in her voice. At 19, she was in her first year of college on a scholarship, studying pre-med just as she had planned. "I am a real lawyer," the woman replied with a smile. "As of 3 weeks ago. And today you have your first interview as one." The interview wasn't at a prestigious law firm. She wasn't aiming for corner offices with city views. Instead, she was meeting with the director of the county's legal aid office, the same office that had helped so many people like her former self. Her son knocked on the bedroom door. At 16, he was already taller than her, his voice deep, but his eyes still carrying the same gentle kindness she'd always loved. "Your coffee's ready," he said, handing her a travel mug. "And this came for you." He held out an envelope. She recognized the return address immediately. The State Bar Association. With slightly shaking fingers, she opened it and read the formal letter inside. "The Judicial Nominating Committee is accepting applications," she read aloud, hardly believing the words. "They're looking for new district court judges." Her children exchanged glances. "Mom, you should apply," her son said simply. She almost laughed. "I just became a lawyer. Judges have years of experience." You have life experience, her daughter countered. Isn't that what you always tell people? That the law needs more people who understand real life. The woman tucked the letter into her bag, not dismissing it entirely, but focusing on the day ahead. One step at a time. Let me get this job first. The legal aid office was busy when she arrived. People filled the waiting room, a mother with tired eyes bouncing a baby on her knee, an elderly man clutching a stack of medical bills, a young couple holding hands nervously. She recognized the look on their faces, the mixture of worry and hope that comes when you need help but aren't sure if you'll get it. The director, a woman with silver hair and a reputation for fighting tirelessly for clients, greeted her warmly. Your references spoke highly of you, especially your old boss. He taught me a lot, she replied. He says you taught him more, the director countered. About seeing clients as people first, not just cases. The interview lasted 2 hours as they discussed her unusual path to law, her vision for helping clients, and her ideas for making legal services more accessible to everyday people. Most lawyers come to us with prestigious internships, the director noted. You come with the experience of having been on the other side of the desk. That perspective is invaluable. By the time she left, she had a job offer. The salary was modest compared to corporate law, but it was more than she'd ever earned before. More importantly, it was work that matched her purpose. That evening, as her children prepared a celebratory dinner, she found herself looking again at the judicial nomination letter. Could she really go from standing helpless in a courtroom to presiding over one? The thought seemed impossible. And yet, 7 years ago, becoming a lawyer had seemed equally impossible. While her children chatted in the kitchen, she sat at her small desk and began researching the nomination process. The requirements were daunting: letters of recommendation, extensive background checks, interviews with the nominating committee, and final selection by the governor. Candidates typically had 15 to 20 years of legal experience. She had just passed the bar. This is crazy, she whispered to herself. But as she closed her laptop, her gaze fell on a small frame she kept on her desk. Inside was not a photo but a document, her eviction notice from all those years ago. She had framed it as a reminder of where she started and why she had fought so hard. She thought about all the people like her former self who entered courtrooms feeling confused, frightened, and small. Maybe it is crazy, she said quietly. But maybe that's exactly why I should do it. She opened a new document on her computer and typed at the top, Application for Judicial Nomination. 10 years had passed since that day of humiliation in the courtroom. 10 years that had transformed a frightened, overwhelmed woman into someone else entirely. The woman stood in front of the same courthouse where her journey began, but this time she entered through a different door, one marked Judicial Offices. Her heart still raced, but not from fear. Today was her first day as a district court judge. Against all odds and expectations, her application to the Judicial Nominating Committee had advanced. Her interview, where she spoke honestly about her journey from being humiliated in court to dedicating her life to making justice accessible, had resonated deeply with the committee. Her unusual path became her greatest strength. We need judges who understand what it feels like to stand on both sides of the bench, the committee chair had told her. Now she followed a court officer down a quiet hallway. Her sensible heels clicked against the marble floor. She wore a simple dark suit, new, not borrowed this time. In her hand, she carried a small bag containing something precious. Your chambers are this way, Your Honor, the officer said respectfully. Your Honor. The words still felt strange, like clothes that didn't quite fit yet. Her office was modest but dignified, with wooden bookshelves, a large desk, and a window overlooking the city. On the desk sat a framed photo of her children, her daughter now in medical school, her son finishing high school with dreams of becoming a teacher. The robe is in the closet, the officer explained. Court begins at 9. When she was alone, the woman opened the closet door. The black judicial robe hung there waiting. She reached out to touch the fabric, remembering how intimidating such robes had once seemed. From her bag, she took out a small frame, the same one that had sat on her desk for years. The eviction notice, faded now, that had once torn her world apart. She placed it on a shelf where only she would see it. A private reminder. At precisely 9 o'clock, she entered her courtroom through the judge's door. The The same courtroom where, 10 years earlier, she had stood trembling and confused. The bailiff called everyone to rise. All rise. The District Court for the County of Jefferson is now in session, the Honorable Judge presiding. She took her seat at the bench, the elevated position giving her a view of the entire room. The black robe felt heavy on her shoulders, not just fabric, but responsibility. "Good morning," she said, her voice clear and steady. "Please be seated." The morning docket was filled with cases much like her own had been. Tenants facing eviction, small claims disputes, ordinary people trying to navigate a system they didn't fully understand. With each case, she did what she had promised herself she would do. She listened carefully. She explained procedures in plain language. She made sure no one felt small or stupid for not knowing legal terms. After lunch break, she returned to find her courtroom unusually full. A housing case involving multiple tenants had drawn attention. As she reviewed the file, something caught her eye, the name of the landlord's attorney. She looked up and there he was, the same lawyer who had stood across from her 10 years ago. The one who had used fancy words and legal tricks while she fumbled with her simple folder of evidence. He didn't recognize her. Why would he? She had been just another forgettable case to him. He approached the bench with the same confidence she remembered, addressing her with practiced charm. "Your Honor, this is a simple matter of contract violation. These tenants clearly breached their lease agreements by—" "Counsel," she interrupted gently, "before we proceed, I'd like to hear from the tenants themselves." A woman stood up, clutching papers just as she herself had done years ago. "We've been trying to get repairs done for months," she explained nervously. "The pipes leak, there's mold growing." The attorney tried to interrupt, but the judge raised her hand slightly. "In my courtroom," she said firmly, "everyone gets to speak. Everyone gets heard. That's how justice works." Something in her tone made the attorney look at her more closely. A flicker of recognition crossed his face, quickly replaced by uncertainty. After hearing all sides, she made her ruling fair, based on law, but delivered with humanity. When court adjourned, she noticed the attorney lingering, looking at her with curiosity. "Have we met before, Your Honor?" he finally asked. She smiled slightly. "Yes, we have. I was once on the other side of this courtroom. You probably don't remember. It was just another eviction case to you." His face registered shock as the memory clicked into place. "Things change," she said simply. "People change. And sometimes the system changes too." That evening, as she hung up her robe in her chambers, she felt a deep sense of completion. The circle that began with humiliation had ended with purpose. The journey wasn't about revenge, it was about transformation. On her desk sat a proposal she'd been working on, a program to provide guidance to people representing themselves in court. She'd already named it, Both Sides of the Bench. Tomorrow would be another day of making the law work for everyone. Her story wasn't over. In many ways, it was just beginning.